If you were given a time machine, it would take you back to the 17th century American horse racing. Massachusetts, if you imagine your neighbor showing off his wealth, the best way is never to invite. It eats large lobsters. On the contrary, if you want to humiliate your servants or mistreat prisoners, then the dragon. Shrimp is definitely the top choice. That's right. Today we're showing off our treasured Boston lobster, which was in those years. Dai has an extremely resounding nickname, cockroach in the sea. How many lobsters were there at that time? What a disaster. After a storm, lobsters washed ashore by the waves can form a wall 2 feet high. For the colonists at that time, the wall was not just a thing to look at. Disgusting. It's even more troublesome to deal with. Their only use. They were buried directly in the soil by farmers. Used as fertilizer for cornfields. Or smash it and feed it to pigs, cattle, or even make it into chopped fish, bait and remove it. Really valuable blood fish. There is even a famous legend circulating. A group of indentured servants at that time couldn't stand eating lobster every day. They went on strike and forced the employer to write a shameful clause in the contract. Don't eat lobster more than 3 times a week. Although historians later discovered that this may just be an exaggerated joke. But it is enough to illustrate the real situation at that time. Eating lobster was symbol of poverty. You may ask, lobster is obviously so delicious. Did people have bad taste buds back then? It's not that they don't know how to eat. It's because creatures like lobsters have their own. A set of horrific self-destruction programs. This is about a bit disgusting biology trivia. Plum's curse. Unlike cattle and sheep, lobsters will not slowly stiffen after death. Instead, it will quickly trigger a biochemical reaction called autolysis. The lobster's digestive tract is filled with powerful processes, keeping him alive. Used to digest prey. But once he dies, these enzymes go out of control and start digestion in turn. Lobsters own muscles. In that era before refrigeration, lobsters would die as long as they were left out of the water. In just a few hours, the tight meat will turn into a puddle of gelatin that smells like water. Imagine that the prison saves trouble by throwing these dead lobsters into a cauldron and boiling them. What the main criminals actually ate tasted like rubber. Smells like rancid protein from the toilet. No wonder people at that time thought that eating this food was simply a physical torture. So the lobsters are locked to the coastline by geographical cages. No one but the poor wants to touch it, since it tastes so bad and so mean. How did he change his identity again? Climb onto the menu of the Titanic and become a meal on the plates of top dignitaries. Behind this is a big scam of the century that takes advantage of the information gap. And this. The turning point of everything started with 2 things: cans and trains. Many people think that lobsters are valuable because they become scarce. But that's only half the story. What really turned it around were 2 things brought about by the Industrial Revolution: cans and trains. In the 1840s, the first lobster cannery opened in Maine. Do you think this makes lobster more expensive? Quite the opposite. It turned lobster into the lunch meat of the 19th century. At that time, a pound of canned lobster was only 11 cents, and a pound. Boston baked beans cost 50-3 cents. That's right. Lobster is actually cheaper than beans, and it's still a veritable poor man's protein. And early canning technology was terrible. Meat is overcooked. It may even turn black due to a chemical reaction with the wall. There was even a proverb at the time to describe this tragedy. The sea is green. The pot is red. The jar is black. If the story ends here, lobster may never be more than a cheap can in the corner of the supermarket. The real turnaround began with the opening of the American Transcontinental Railroads. The company's managers discovered a huge business opportunity, or a huge information gap. They realized that the inland passengers, those who lived in Ohio, Illinois, the wealthy people have no idea that lobster is a junk food at the beach. So a wonderful marketing package began. Railroad company buys lobsters at rock-bottom prices in May, and then transported them to the famous Berman and Eining car. In the rickety carriage, lobsters are no longer fertilizer piled on the beach. They were served in fine porcelain, with white tablecloth, silver tableware, so melted butter and lemon. What's on the menu is no longer sea cockroaches, but ones from the distant Atlantic. Rare delicacies for inland passengers. They have no need. Cultural memory. All they taste is novelty and deliciousness. This is classic geographical arbitrage. Distance creates not only the illusion of beauty, but also the illusion of cost. When these wealthy people from the interior took the train and arrived in Boston or New York, they started calling names for lobster at a fancy restaurant. East Coast chefs are stunned. But since rich people are willing to pay, the garbage becomes gold. It becomes a physical migration from the slums to the tables of the rich, but to become a top luxury product, it also needs to overcome the last psychological line of defense. It needs to make the person eating it feel superior. This is the famous Van Balen effect in economics. The more troublesome it is to buy, and the more advanced it is. Once the lobster has completed its physical migration, it still needs one final step. In order to complete the leap across classes, it must conquer the psychological defense line of human beings. By the 20th century, lobster had become a typical Van Balen commodity, also known as conspicuous consumption. The higher its price, the more people want it. Have you ever wondered why high-end restaurants always prefer shells? Whole lobster is actually extremely troublesome to eat. You need pliers. You also need to wear a bib with your fork. It makes your hands full of oil. But this trouble is precisely the reason why it is expensive. It signals to those around you, I'm not in a hurry. I don't need to wolf down. I have a lot of leisure. This ritual of shelling, it is a class barrier in itself. Keep the working class out. However, when an organism grows from fertilizer, turned into soft golden things started to get dangerous. It's no longer just food, it becomes a national interest. 1960-1. A conflict known as the Lobster Wars broke out between Brazil and France. In order to compete for fishing rights in the Atlantic Ocean, Brazil even mobilized. Destroyers and aircraft carriers went to chase away the French fishing boats, but the most important thing about this war was, the absurdity lies not in force, but the reason for the quarrel between the two parties. The two sides launched an extremely magical biological debate based on the Geneva Convention. There is only one core argument. Is it walking or swimming? Brazilian government insists lobsters crawl on the bottom of the sea, so it belongs to the settled organisms of the continental shelf, owned by Brazil. The French government countered that lobsters bounce when frightened, so it's swimming. It's an open sea fish. Anyone can catch it. For a few crustaceans, human legal logic has been twisted to the extreme. Until Brazilian Admiral Moreira said the most embarrassing sentence in the history of diplomacy. Famous stunt. Gentlemen, if a lobster can jump, it is a fish. Because the kangaroo can jump, isn't it a bird? Although the war eventually subsided. But this sea cockroach has thoroughly proven its status Not only will it empty your wallet, it can even make two countries fight each other over this. Seeing this, you may think that Lobster is amazing enough, but it also has an ultimate secret. A network that makes all the rich have a sacred network, but it is full of irony. The biological miracle of immortality. If the fan ball effect makes Lobster a symbol of class, then biology gives it an almost mythical quality. When you stare at a giant century-old lobster in a fancy restaurant, you facing what may be a biological miracle. Unlike humans, lobsters cooked weekly have a trait called neglect, the superpower of aging. Their cells contain a highly active telomerase that can continuously repair DNA. Theoretically, cells can divide indefinitely. In other words, lobsters don't age or lose their fertility like we do. On the contrary, they get stronger as they get older and more fertile as they get older, which makes lobsters a symbol of swallowing up time. It perfectly fits the psychological projection of longevity and vitality among the powerful class. But nature is fair. He gave the lobster the potential for immortality, but put a physical shackles on him. Lobsters often die because they are too tired. They continue to shed their shells throughout their lives. The bigger their bodies are, the more time they need to shed their shells. The energy is more terrifying. Eventually, when a lobster grows large enough, the energy he has accumulated will not be enough to support him in breaking out of that hard layer of old shells. They will not die of old age, but they will die of disasters, or get trapped in your old shell and die from infection. Does this fate of becoming stronger and more fragile sound like a Greek tragedy? Now the fate of this creature has taken a new turn. During the 2008 financial crisis, lobster prices collapsed. McDonald's has launched cheap McLobster, but the rise of the Chinese market. Because of its red appearance after cooking, it symbolizes in Chinese culture extreme good fortune and luck. Growing Eastern demand took over excess production, make lobster prices strong again. Meanwhile, global warming is driving them further north to frigid waters. Maybe in the future this former poor man's fertilizer. Will it really become a legend that we can't afford because of the climate crisis? Okay, if you like my story, please click to subscribe and like. See you next time. Goodbye.